Hey everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to another video here on the Detroit Lions channel. And look, Lions fans, tomorrow is game day once again. The Detroit Lions will host the Washington Commanders at Ford Field in their second preseason game of the year. The matchup is set for Saturday, August 23rd at noon Eastern Time. After the loss to the Cincinnati Bengals in the preseason opener, I'm honestly looking forward to seeing how Detroit responds. I hope tomorrow is different. I want to see this team come out with more energy, more focus, and most importantly, I want to see some of these players take advantage of their opportunities and make a strong impression on Dan Campbell and the coaching staff. And I want to hear from you, Lions fans. What are you expecting from tomorrow's game against the Commanders? What do you want to see from Detroit? And hopefully, Dan Campbell puts a strong focus on this game, and we get a much better performance from the Lions. So, without any more waiting, let's get right into today's topic, because there is a lot to talk about before the Lions take the field tomorrow. The Detroit Lions have some important developments coming out of training camp, and unfortunately, once again, injuries are right at the center of the conversation. The latest situation involves Andis Rakestraw, who suffered an injury toward the end of practice and did not return. According to the report, the injury was considered non-contact, which immediately raises concern because this is another setback for a player who has struggled to stay healthy consistently. For the Lions, this is frustrating because the team needs players to be available and build consistency, especially with the regular season getting closer. When a player repeatedly has his progress interrupted by injuries, it becomes difficult for the coaching staff to know exactly what they have, and it also makes it harder for that player to establish a dependable role. The latest setback with Rakestraw is therefore something Lions fans will want to keep watching closely, but that is not the only injury concern in Detroit right now, and the situation involving Sam LaPorta may be even more important for the offense. Dan Campbell explained that LaPorta was hit in the hip and that the issue flared up and became aggravated. The encouraging part is that the team feels good about him in the long term and plans to rest him for a while so the problem can calm down. However, there is now some uncertainty about whether LaPorta will be available for the beginning of the regular season. That is obviously something Lions fans do not want to hear. LaPorta is an important part of this offense, and even though the injury is not being described as a long-term problem, missing valuable preparation time is never ideal. The Lions need their offensive pieces to get reps together, develop timing, and enter the regular season with as much continuity as possible. The hope is that giving LaPorta time to recover now will allow him to return when the games actually count. And that brings us to the next major storyline. The Lions are preparing to face the Washington Commanders in preseason, and Jared Goff will not be playing in the game. Dan Campbell confirmed that Josh Dobbs will start at quarterback, while Luke Altmyer is also expected to receive opportunities. Campbell described Altmyer as a young and promising player, which is exactly why giving him plenty of reps during this part of the preseason can be valuable. For a preseason game, this is actually a fascinating situation. Lions fans already know what Jared Goff brings to this offense. They know what Amon-Ra St. Brown can do. They know what Jahmyr Gibbs can bring when he is on the field. The preseason is where the coaching staff can look at players who still have questions surrounding them and determine who deserves a larger role once the regular season arrives. That is why this game against Washington is much more important than simply looking at the final score. The Lions need to evaluate players, establish some continuity, and see how different position groups perform against another team. The offensive line is one of the areas worth watching closely. Juice Scruggs is expected to work at center, while players such as Mahogany and Tate Ratledge will also be part of the evaluation as Detroit continues trying to establish how the unit will come together. That continuity is particularly important because the regular season is getting very close. Training camp practices can only tell you so much. At some point, players have to line up against another team and execute in a game environment. The Lions did not have outside teams coming to Allen Park for joint practices during this training camp, so getting some competition against Washington provides another opportunity to evaluate the roster. There are also several defensive players worth watching. The report points to players such as Derek Moore, Ahmed Hassanein, Aleem McNeil, Tyreek Williams, Derek Barnes, Malcolm Rodriguez, and members of the secondary as players who could provide interesting things to watch during the game. The exact amount of playing time for the starters remains something to monitor, but the Lions clearly have players who need those opportunities. At the same time, there is a balance that Dan Campbell and the coaching staff have to manage. Yes, players need reps. Yes, the team needs to build continuity, but after another wave of injury concerns, nobody wants to see an important player get hurt in a preseason game. There is no reason to leave established starters on the field longer than necessary if the coaching staff already knows what they can do. That is especially true for players such as Aiden Hutchinson. Lions fans do not need a long preseason performance to understand what Hutchinson can bring to the defense. The same logic applies to several established players. The most valuable part of this game may be watching the players who are still fighting for roles and trying to prove that they belong. One of those battles is in the running back room. The Lions want to see which players can separate themselves and potentially earn the number 3 and number 4 spots. Those opportunities matter because preseason touches can help coaches determine who is ready to contribute if injuries or game situations create a need during the regular season. Isaac Tesleya is another player worth watching after a disappointing performance in the previous game. The goal now is to see whether he can bounce back and show the ability that the organization has seen from him. A strong performance against Washington would give him another opportunity to build confidence and show that he can be part of the bigger picture. And while all of this is happening, another debate has started around Alim McNeill. CBS Sports' Garrett Padell criticized McNeill, pointing to his availability, defensive grade, ranking among interior defensive linemen, and his recent sack production. The argument was essentially that Detroit needs more from McNeill over the coming seasons, but the report pushes back strongly against that criticism, especially the suggestion that McNeill should be viewed as an injury-prone player. The argument is that McNeill's absence was connected to one significant injury, and that after returning, he needed time to regain his confidence and rhythm. According to what has been seen during OTAs, minicamp, and training camp, McNeill has been getting back to his previous form. That distinction matters. Looking only at statistics or missed games can sometimes leave out the context behind those numbers. The Lions believe McNeill can be an important part of the defense, and his recent work at training camp has reportedly provided reasons for optimism. Now, the preseason game against Washington offers another chance to see him in action and determine whether that progress continues. So while the headlines may focus heavily on the injuries, there is a lot more happening around this Lions team. Detroit has to manage the health of important players like Sam LaPorta, evaluate the situation surrounding Andis Rakestraw, give Josh Dobbs and Luke Altmaier meaningful quarterback reps, continue building the offensive line, evaluate the running back competition, watch the development of Isaac Tesleya, and determine how players such as Alim McNeill are progressing. The biggest question is whether the Lions can get through this stretch of the preseason with the players they need healthy while still giving the roster enough competition and preparation before the regular season begins. After everything we've seen with the injuries and the upcoming preseason matchup against Washington, what do you think the Lions should prioritize right now? Protecting their key players or giving them more preseason reps to build continuity? What makes this preseason matchup against Washington especially interesting is that the Lions have several players who now have a real opportunity to change the conversation around them. This is not simply about finding out who wins the game. It is about seeing which players can take advantage of their opportunities while the coaching staff continues putting the roster together. At quarterback, Josh Dobbs will get the start, with Luke Altmaier also expected to receive reps. That gives Detroit a chance to evaluate two different players behind Jared Goff without exposing Goff unnecessarily in a preseason game. Dan Campbell has already made it clear that Goff will not play, and that decision makes sense when you consider what the Lions already know about their starting quarterback. There is more value in using these snaps to evaluate players whose roles are not completely established. The same idea applies across the offense. Detroit needs to see how the offensive line looks when the players have to operate together in a real game. Juice Scruggs is expected to work at center, while Mahogany and Tate Ratledge are among the players worth watching. The team needs this group to start developing some kind of continuity because the regular season is getting closer, and eventually the Lions have to know which combination gives them the best chance to operate consistently. That is one of the biggest things to watch against Washington. It is easy to focus on the biggest names on the roster, but preseason football is really about the players fighting for positions. Every snap can matter when the coaching staff is deciding who stays, who gets more opportunities, and who can be trusted when the games become meaningful. The running back room is another example. Detroit needs to determine who can earn earn the number 3 and number 4 positions. That means the players competing for those spots need to make their opportunities count. Getting touches is important, but so is showing that they can execute what the coaching staff is asking them to do. A strong preseason performance can change how a player is viewed inside the organization. Isaac Taslea is also someone who could benefit from a bounce-back performance. The previous game did not go as well as expected for him, so this is another chance to respond. Football gives players very little time to dwell on one performance. The next opportunity comes quickly, and what Taslea does with that opportunity will be something worth watching. Then there is the defensive side of the football, where the Lions have plenty of players who need evaluation. Derek Moore was dealing with an issue, and his availability was something to monitor. Ahmed Hassanin, Aleem McNeil, Tyreek Williams, Derek Barnes, Malcolm Rodriguez, and the secondary are also part of the larger group that Lions fans should be watching. For McNeil specifically, this game could provide another opportunity to push back against the criticism that has recently been directed his way. The criticism focused heavily on statistics, grades, and availability. But the argument from the Lions' perspective is that the numbers do not tell the complete story of his situation. McNeil had a significant injury, missed time because of it, and then had to work his way back. Returning from an injury is not simply about stepping onto the field and immediately becoming exactly the same player you were before. There can be a period where a player has to regain confidence, trust his body again, and get comfortable playing at full speed. That is why the recent observations from OTAs, minicamp, and training camp are important in the context of this discussion. The report indicates that McNeil has looked more like himself again. If that continues into the preseason game, it could be another